Good evening. My name is Dr. Beverly Fry. I'm the Dean for Education at Cabrini College, and I'd like to welcome you all, and for many of you, it's really welcome back. What we have here is a lot of alumni that are involved in trying to develop this Educators on Campus event, and we really would like this to be the beginning of a number of series of events here at Cabrini College, bringing us all back to really have these discussions and to network as well. For those of you that may be new to the atrium, just in case, the restrooms are directly behind and on the left if you need to use the restrooms. The other piece that I think is wonderful about this particular setting is the mural that's behind you, and I don't know if you have seen that coming in or at other times, but this is a mural that was done by the students, and all of us know that Mother Cabrini is the patroness of immigrants, and this really was her, really was the picture a lot about Mother Cabrini, and on Cabrini Day, the students developed this and have unveiled it, so it really sort of pulls us together. And what I'd like to do is to really open with a reflection about Mother Cabrini, because that is how we're all connected. This is from Mary Louise Sullivan's, Sister Mary Louise Sullivan's book about Mother Cabrini, and she was president at Cabrini College for 10 years. This is a little bit about what happened in 1899 when Mother Cabrini began to develop a lot of her schools. The establishment of a number of parochial schools revealed the commitment of Frances Cabrini and her missionary sisters to the education of Italian immigrant children. In 1899, the pastor of Our Lady of Mount Carmel Parish in Newark, New Jersey, asked Mother Cabrini to provide teachers for the growing number of Italian children in his neighborhood. After sizing up the situation for herself, she gladly accepted. The first classes were held in a storefront, which the children called the House of Glass. It was freezing in winter and suffocating in summer. But from the very first appearance of the sisters, the children joyfully flocked to their school with genuine enthusiasm. And this is an excerpt from the Newark memoir that recorded some of the event. Everything was lacking. There were no comforts of any kind. But there were the Italian sisters who spoke their language. The children sensed they were loved by them and were happy and faithful to their poor classrooms. Soon attendance rose 200, then 300, then 400. Many had no desks, no chairs, but it wasn't important. They were at the school of the Italian sisters, and this was enough for them. And so I think that this sort of reminds us of our time at Cabrini, whether it was years ago or is present day. It really is the missionary sisters. And as I say that, I'm looking at Sister Christine, who's joining us here today, and many of you know her, and we've had a number of stories at dinner that Sister Christine was a part of all of them, whether it was a dean of students or a prayerful moment. And I know that the sisters, comfort all of us, their presence here, but the way Mother Cabrini has touched all of our lives, and that's what unifies us here today. And as we look at the education area, we know that Mother Cabrini was a teacher, and her mission too was to prepare teachers. And that's who we have here today, are those teachers that have been prepared by Cabrini College and Mother Cabrini. So with that, I just want to give you the quick overview of the program. I will introduce the panelists, and I'll introduce Dane Linn, who then will do their presentation, followed by each of the panelists giving us a reflection, a short reflection on the Common Core. And then we're going to open that up to questions and answers. And I will be around with the microphone, but Dane will be developing that question and answer session. So then let me introduce our panelists. And I'll start at the far end with Jessica Wyatt. She graduated in 2009 with her undergraduate degree, and then with her master's degree in 2013. Jessica is a second grade teacher at Woodland Elementary School with the Ridley School District. She serves as a second grade team motivator and a building representative for the Everyday Mathematics curriculum team. and she credits hands-on education she received at Cabrini for her ability as an educator. I'm not going to read the full bios because they are in your programs, but I just want to highlight different aspects from each of our panelists. Next, we have Colleen Lellity, who graduated in 1995. She is assistant professor at Cabrini College and has been here since 2002. She also worked as a learning support specialist, as an specialist education teacher in the Pottsgrove School District. And Colleen has been very much an advocate, an academic, and a leader on domestic violence education. And she has published widely in this field. And it also reminds me that she also is hosting the next Educators on Campus event, which is, if you received your postcard, it talks about that event, as well as if you want to pick up the postcard over on the side, you can do that, which is Wednesday, October 8th at 5:30. I'm here as well. And it's really looking at keeping children safe, child victims of domestic violence. So we have Colleen here as well. And then next, I have Anthony Gabrielle. And Anthony is a curriculum supervisor at Garnet Valley School District. And he also has worked as a secondary English language arts teacher and a K-12 instructional staff developer with a specific focus on integrating literacy, technology, and curriculum. And we were just talking about that at dinner, at the importance of technology really being infused in what we do rather than alongside of what we do. He has co-authored a number of English and science curricula, and he is the co-founder of a group of an education blog, www.bestandnext.org. And we also listen to a lot of the work that he's doing with this, and he has really offered to help with the development of the technology in the classrooms. And this, his website, I think the blog would be a good place to be able to integrate with that. He is in his third year working on the Pennsylvania Learns project, and he is a joint venture project between Pennsylvania Department of Education and Apple. And he also received his certification in education administration and supervision from Cabrini College in 2012. And then next we have Bob Saladino, who's a 1993 graduate with our bachelor's degree, and then from his master's degree from Cabrini in 1997. He is principal of Rose Tree Media School District, and he is currently principal at Springton Lake Middle School. And prior to accepting this role, Bob served as the principal of Owen J. Roberts Middle School in Pottstown and the assistant principal at Abington Junior High School. Bob has began his career in education as a math teacher at Ballackinwood Middle School of Lower Merion School District. So I think it's really important that we see each of the panelists we have here today, what they really bring as far as their teaching background and their experiences as well. And before I introduce Dane, who will then do the presentation, I just wanted you to know that there will be some classes that are coming in. There's a 7:15 class that we have, so if they do come in, you may need to move to the center or whatever we need to do. And those of you who want to join us over here, if it's more comfortable, there's plenty of seats. Oh, there's always seats up front. But you're welcome to come and be able to come closer to the presentation. Please feel free to come in. So Dane Linn is a 1983 graduate from Cabrini College and Vice President of Business Roundtable. Dane is a nationally recognized expert in the field of education, educational policy, and education reform. As Vice President for the Business Roundtable, Dane oversees the Education and Workforce Committee, advancing the Business Roundtable positions on education reform, U.S. innovation capacity, and workforce preparedness. Previously, he was Executive Director of the State Policy at the College Board and Director of the Educational Policy Division of the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. At the National Governors Association, he spearheaded the development of the Common Core State Standards, now adopted by 46 states. Dane began his professional career in education as an elementary school teacher and principal. So therefore, it's my honor to present to you Dane Linn, who will lead us with the presentation, followed by the panelists and then our discussion. Thank you.
play Oprah before Oprah goes out to take your questions. I can't stand still, especially when I have a 2.5-hour drive after this, back to DC. Thanks for having me. I'm always glad to come back here, and it's only my second time in a very, very long time. And so, let's just get this on the table, okay? Like, I'm the guy who broke the hand of the statue outside the statue. Okay? So, if you see a crack in the left hand, it was me. Sister Christina caught me in her nightgown at 12 o'clock, so much partying at the mansion, okay? But I'm grown up now, and I've encouraged my daughter to never do those things, never. But now that she's married, she's not my responsibility anymore. So what I want to do is give you some background on the development of the Common Core State Standards, how they came to be. But before I do that, I think there are two important things to know. One is, and I say this everywhere I go, because I think it's so critical, that if the United States is going to be a competitive nation, if we are truly going to have opportunities for our children to have the same quality of life that I've enjoyed, and to be able to take advantage of the high-wage, high-skilled jobs, we have to figure out ways in which our education system can raise the bar. And it's not just raising the bar, but it's thinking about the supports around the system, because the standards alone aren't going to get us there. You can raise the bar as much as you want, but if you don't have high-quality professional development, if we don't think about revamping teacher preparation and licensure and certification, and the list goes on, then all we will have done is revise the standards. And that's the game states have played for a very, very long time. The second thing I want to say is we don't just have an achievement gap in this country, we have an equity gap in this country. And as this country becomes more and more diverse, and I'm not talking just about the urban centers. I mean, my wife lives 6 hours away from DC. We see each other once in a while. That's why we've been married so long. I don't know what we'll do when we eventually live together all the time. But it is 98% white. But there's middle class and there is extreme poverty. Extreme. The prevalence of OxyContin in our community, the Rite Aid pharmacists that are giving out OxyContin, they're selling it on the black market to a community, a town of 3,000 people. We are losing kids, we are losing moms and dads, and the poverty is just so extreme that no one can even think about whether or not college is a possibility. So I think we have a lot of, yes, societal challenges, but we have a lot of challenges within our school system. And if we don't figure out how we're going to get more students college and career ready, this country can't compete. And our kids can't have the same quality of life. So that's what really drives the standards. Recognizing the standards alone aren't the silver bullet. There are many other parts to reforming our system. So let's go on with the presentation. I really want to cover with you briefly, so we can get to the panelists, what the case is for the rigorous standards, why this focus on academic standards, which, as a reminder, really starts the focus with English language arts and mathematics. English language arts not just being reading, but reading, writing, listening, and speaking. How did we get here? How did we get to the place where we now have these Common Core State Standards? And one thing that's become clear to me since I left NGA, the Governors Association, is that the words themselves have become so toxic that it's not been a discussion about whether or not the standards are good. It's been a discussion about whether or not we want our kids to be common. And I could talk for a long time about the debates we had on what to call these standards, but the fact of the matter is, the words Common Core are in a lot of states, what's triggering this controversy. but there are other issues as well. And then the need for better tests. And the need for better tests, we're going to talk a little bit about quality of testing and the volume of testing, which I think is a pretty significant issue in many of the states. So let's go to the next one. So making the case. For those of you, and if I start to throw out any acronyms, just like raise your hand, give me the signal, and I'll clarify. But NAEP is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This country doesn't have a national test, but it's the closest thing we have. It's a very well-respected test, and all states administer this as part of No Child Left Behind. But we do a sampling. And when we look at the NAEP tests, which include many subjects, but obviously reading and math are two of them, our performance remains flat. At the same time, the number of first-year college students continues to increase. You know, in my state, we can look at the data by high school, and the number of students who are taking AP classes, what their scores on the exams, and how they perform when they get to college-level mathematics. We can look at the students who just went on a normal track of 3 or 4 years of math. Those two categories of student in my state, 50% of them are in remedial math. How can you take an AP class and 4 years of math and end up in remedial math? Then we want to talk, then the other piece of evidence is really on PISA. So there are two international assessments. One is known as PISA, and the countries that participate in PISA represent 2/3 of the world economy, the most industrialized countries in the world. So we don't have necessarily Latvia, for example, participating in PISA. What we see from the results in PISA is that former Eastern Bloc countries, as an example, like Poland, are improving dramatically. They're still at the bottom, but they've made such an effort to focus on lifting all votes that the performance of these students is improving significantly. It's even improving if you look at, although they won't make it public, China, the western provinces in China, are the poorest in the country. Their lowest performers perform better than our top 10%. Yet our performance, you can see the numbers there. Another assessment that I won't provide details on is TIMSS, the International Math and Science Study. Excuse me. Let's go to the next one. So I'm not gonna test you. Actually, I'm gonna give you the answer. But this is an example of a math problem from PISA, and you can see the problem. I'm not gonna read it to you. You can read it yourself. Look what the OECD average is. 79% of the countries students in those countries that take this assessment get that item right, when only 41% of the US students get it right. There are a lot of examples like this, a lot. Next slide. So I'm with the business community now. The Business Roundtable is an organization that represents CEOs from the Fortune 200. And we've really, since I was asked to come on board to kind of revamp the education and workforce portfolio. And so Common Core has been a cornerstone of our work, as is the work on the skills gap, which is another topic for another day. But what we hear our members saying is that the number of jobs requiring an adult to have an associate or higher in the country continues to rise. Now, one thing I don't have in that statement is the number of employers who are looking for industry-recognized credentials. And I think an important point to make here, which is related to this discussion, is that not everyone's going to go to college. And quite frankly, a number of the high-wage, high-skilled jobs that require industry-recognized certificates don't require you to go to college, but they require you to take rigorous math and English language arts courses. So I often tell the story, and I was in a class before this, I often tell the story of my mechanic who went to a career technical center at John Marshall High School in Tysons Corner, Virginia. He's 21 years old. He went to the CTE, the Career Technical Center. He's industry-recognized GM mechanic, and he makes $80,000 a year. So I think it depends on what a student's interests are and what their motivations are, but college isn't the only pathway. I think we have to think about what are those other opportunities that allow us to support a family, to enjoy what we do, and to have a good quality of life. 70% of the jobs now require post-secondary education, broadly defined. I would include industry-recognized certificates, associates, and bachelors in that. And employers estimate that 45% of recent high school graduates lack the skills to advance. And then you see the last one there, we'll need to employ 123 million highly skilled workers. Right now, we have 9.5 million individuals in this country unemployed. And we have just BRT members. We have 215 members at the Business Roundtable, somewhere in that neighborhood. And we have roughly 600,000 jobs open. We had one company down in Charlotte who built a facility, Siemens, advanced manufacturing. They went down there, they have 7,000 jobs. Right now, they can only hire 3,000. Now, there are some individuals who have mobility issues. They can't move from Montana and sell their house to take advantage of that job. But in large part, 80% of the individuals that Siemens is interviewing aren't qualified for the jobs. They don't have the skill set after they take the assessment, the performance application on the job. And so what are we going to do? What are the vehicles by which we ensure more individuals can take advantage of those jobs? Next slide. So the major design goals, really, we look for the standards to have the best available evidence. We wanted to build on the best work in states as well as other countries, and include rigorous content and the application of knowledge, so that the standards weren't just, once we move to assessment, that it's not just about regurgitation of facts. I think a couple important points here. A lot of people say, and we're going to include some of the myths here, a lot of people say to us, well, why did you only look at top performing countries? When in fact, what we did is we worked with 6 states really closely. Massachusetts and Minnesota, 2 states that perform very well on international assessments, and 4 others. Those states were part of our nucleus to inform the development of the standards, because of not just claims that their standards were good, but they had performance data internationally to show that the kids in Colorado were doing particularly well. We also, though, looked at some of the countries internationally and the PISA and TIMSS data that I referred to earlier. Now, the first point is one where some individuals who we brought under the tent disagree with me. I've always felt that in the education community, we always wait till we have the perfect evidence to justify anything we do. And in my opinion, we would never have ended up with standards if we waited for the absolute research. So we used the best available research, conclusive research that we have, hoping that other entities, colleges and universities, the federal government, who I think R&D is an appropriate role for them, future research could inform the revision of the standards as time goes by. But we used what we have now, using the gold standard of research, as defined by research experts from around the country. Next slide. So what are the standards? They really are what students should know and be able to do. We really never intended, our intent was not, is not, for us to tell teachers, these are the textbooks you have to use. This is the type of curriculum. The standards define the what. The intent was not to tell teachers how to teach them, how to teach the standards, and what materials, textbooks or electronic or other media that they could use. Those decisions, I mean, curriculum in this country is the holy grail. And I was asking the previous class, why didn't you start with curriculum? Because that's where leading countries start. I mean, they have very centralized systems, and they start with defining the actual curriculum teachers have to teach, what they teach, when they teach it, and to whom they teach it. The governance system in this country is too diffuse to be able to do that. So that's why we started with standards. And there are many efforts to provide voluntary tools for teachers so that they have easy, they have free access to high quality materials that have been independently reviewed and validated, if that's the path you choose. And then assessment, and figuring out how we use better assessments, whether it's the these two consortia that are working with states to develop more rigorous assessments, more open-ended assessments. They're not just norm referenced, in other words, color in the bubble. But their students are really requiring you to demonstrate how you apply the knowledge. What good does it do to know how to use the operation in a probability or statistics class without knowing how it applies to the real world? Next one. So this is a quick lesson. We've been down this road a lot of times in we've had more national summits than I can count on two hands. We've had more efforts to bring states together to develop standards, and largely all of them have fallen apart. Quite frankly, when I was at NGA, we had a former governor of Arizona, who became the Secretary of Homeland Security, was the chair of the National Governors Association, and her focus was on international competitiveness. And one component of that initiative was to figure out how our system of education would be internationally benchmarked. What would it take to compete with the best of the best? That led to this report. So it's benchmarking US students receive a world-class education. So if you've heard the initiative to develop the standards came out of the Obama administration, or it came out of the stimulus, it came from this report. And when we looked at the recommendations, we decided the most logical place to start and in moving forward these recommendations was to launch a state-led effort in developing the standards that we've been talking about. Even though the Secretary and the President like to talk about the Common Core a lot, and they give people the impression that they were funded by the administration, and they came up with the idea, not true. Next slide. So there's some key elements, and I'm not going to go over these, but I do want to point out a couple of these, and I'm going to jump around a little bit. The first one I want to point to is under writing, this emphasis on argument and informative explanatory writing. And the second is grounding in evidence. The content experts in reading, writing, listening, and speaking, who wrote the standards, really felt that most writing in classrooms, if you think about, as an example, the first day back to school, the writing is, so describe what you did over the summer. And did you have fun doing it? What didn't you like about your summer? I mean, there's very subjective opinion-oriented writing, and there's rarely an attempt for students to have the opportunity to make a logical argument and support the arguments they're making in their writing with evidence, with facts to support that. So there's a real emphasis, not just in the standards, but on the assessments that you'll see come out from the PARC and Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia. And you can look at some of those test items. They've finished the field trial, and you can look on both of their websites to take the practice test and see how you do on it. The other is the focus on jumping up to reading, this balance between literature and informational texts. Some people say you have a required reading list. Well, the reading list that's in the back of these standards, we actually developed, we brought together the left, the right, the experts to help us identify some exemplary texts students should read, whether they be historical, the Bill of Rights, whether they be the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King, whether it be Wuthering Heights, or other pieces of literature. Those were just examples of what the writers of the standards felt would benefit students to have an opportunity to not just read, but apply in the classroom setting. So we really struck, I think, a balance between literature and informational text, as well as text complexity. And I remember going through my teacher prep program here, we always use the Dolch word list, but it's more complex the older you get. And how do we demand more from our students on the complexity of the texts they read that are grade and age appropriate? And then we go to the math. I think that's the next one. So one of the challenges in math is that in the review of the textbooks for the major publishers that our writers did, a third of what is taught in 3rd grade gets retaught in 4th grade. We reteach a significant portion of the curriculum 1 year to the next. And we don't naturally always teach the mathematics knowledge, mathematics skills in progressions. You learn how to add and subtract, you multiply, and you divide. And it's a progression. And if you don't get those early skills, it's difficult to master the skills in high school. You know, in the draft standards we produced, we convened a lot of expert groups, and we convened a lot of teachers. And we said to the AFT and the NEA, pick the teachers, we'll fly them in, meet with us for 3 days. The AFT teachers, I have to say I was most impressed, excuse me, with the AFT teachers. They literally cut up every standard, and the elementary, the middle, and the high school math teachers divided up. And where they felt the progressions were out of whack, they reordered them. But not just reordered them, what they had to do was show us the evidence for why X standard should be taught later in 4th grade versus earlier. Why a particular standard should be in the prob and stats standards, not in the calculus standards. Although I have to admit, we weren't that blatantly wrong. But there were real opportunities for us to get that kind of input from teachers, from reading content experts from around the world that we brought together to give us feedback on the draft standards. We also opened them up online. We allowed parents, teachers, principals, community leaders to provide comments on the standards. And we had, I think we had about 10,000 standards, feedback on the standards, in which we collapsed, we reviewed every one of them, and we actually made quite a few revisions based on that feedback from around the country. And then the last one I want to point out is really the importance of making sure the standards are ambitious but achievable. And part of doing that is really figuring out what is most critical. I don't know if any of you have ever taken a look at your state standards, although it's an exaggeration, they're about yay thick. These are the K-12 standards in English language arts and mathematics. They are more focused, there's more coherence to them, as determined by the experts, not determined by me. Next slide. Here's where we get into a lot of pushback. Testing. I'll say up front, whether it's going to be one of the 2 consortia, or ACT, or any other assessment vendor, we need someone to validate that whatever instrument they're using, that a third party makes sure it's measuring the knowledge and skills it claims to measure. I also think we have a lot of testing going on in schools. Principals add tests, superintendents add tests, states add tests, NCLB has requirements, No Child Left Behind. How are we going to not just streamline the assessments so teachers can focus more on instruction, but how do we make sure that the tests students are taking actually provide information to parents about how their children are performing, strengths, weaknesses? How do we make sure that the assessments provide valuable information to teachers so they can change practice? How do we use those assessments to inform what needs to change in teacher preparation as well? I briefly mentioned, the 2 consortia. Smarter Balance is a more adaptive assessment, the use of technology, and so the question you get depends on your answer to the previous question. They get more difficult the more successful you are, so that we get an accurate measure of what students are able to do. I would say PARC is a little bit more traditional, and although the 2 of them, despite their differences, one more technology dependent, the other not so much, they are much more focused on open-ended questions. There's more application of knowledge. You can see that in some of the items. They're less norm referenced, less color in the bubbles. There's required extended writing in both subjects. There is, I think the assessments are intended to mirror the type of assessments that you want teachers to be able to administer, so that the way they get tested diagnostically, day in and day out, quizzes and tests, isn't vastly different from the way they're being measured on a standardized assessment. Next one. I can go through these so we can get to the panel. So then we have aligned assessments, and this is just an example of a previous assessment, state unnamed, and an example from one of the, I think this one's actually from the Park Assessment Consortium. But you can see the vast difference between the two of them. And because of time, I'm not going to go through this in great detail. I'm happy to make the slides available afterwards. This is an example in mathematics. Let's go to the next one. So implementation is key. The standards are not the silver bullet. They should never be the silver bullet. There are many other components that are key to successful implementation. The one that gets the short shrift all the time is the second one. Professional development. There is no system of professional development in our districts. There is no system of professional development in our states. And the non-system of professional development that we have is not providing professional development necessarily based on student performance data. So what you get bears oftentimes, my wife who just finished teaching for 30 years, tells me, the longer she taught, the less relevant the professional development was. It had little to do with what she did in the classroom every day. I think, we have a problem at the state level too. And we're working to meet with, once we get through this election cycle, where we're going to have a lot of new governors in the country, to help them understand that what you do at the state level is you layer policy on top of policy on top of policy, and nothing ever goes away. And you end up with contradictory policy. You end up with policy that does not help kids, children, and it doesn't help students. It doesn't help teachers. We need to think about how we use the data from better assessments to inform good policy, to help inform the decisions about where dollars go in classrooms across the country. The last one I just briefly want to mention, because a lot of people do ask about curriculum. We're not going to get, into curriculum, but there is an effort underway out west where several foundations have come together to set up a nonprofit that will evaluate, for those that want their curriculum materials evaluated, they will evaluate whether or not the materials actually align to the standards. As a way to give teachers and people who buy instructional materials greater assurance that what they're buying is actually aligned to the standards. I used to work at a state agency, and my friends I was in a state who, we had statewide textbook adoption cycles. And he was always telling me, I can't wait to retire, because then I'm going to go work for the people that sell me the materials. And 50% of the people in agencies still yet who used to buy the materials for their state actually now work for the vendors. So there's a little game that's being played, and everyone knows the game's being played. But no one's bothering to make sure that what they actually adopt, if you're in a statewide textbook adoption state, whether or not it's really going to help students. So higher ed role. I already talked a little bit about this. We get into this on bullet 2. We get into this game of, well, it's not our responsibility till they come to us. And it's not the blame game, but it's, well, we wait till they get here. And K-12 really doesn't want higher ed in their business. They're all of our kids. They belong to all of us. So it's a joint responsibility. The other is, this isn't an effort intended to focus this on remediation. This is about also accelerating the kids who want to be ready. If the 5th grader is doing 7th grade math, he or she should be able to have exposure to that instruction and to demonstrate competency against the standards. And then it's a real focus on competency-based, which in my world is, I think, a term that's getting thrown around quite a bit. And a lot of people aren't thinking about what does competency-based education really mean. I think relevant to this issue
It's about being able to demonstrate your ability to apply the knowledge and skills in these standards in real-world settings. Next one. There's the end. Yeah. So I really look forward to the discussion. And so I'm just going to start with the panel, and we'll work our way down just to give some brief comments about your thoughts about the standards, given the role that you play, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Bob?
Well, good evening, everyone. I guess when I think about Common Core standards, I think we'd be hard-pressed to say that standards aren't important. As Dane indicated, in our country, there's a lot of inequity when it comes to public education. And those standards are not the silver bullet, as Dane mentioned several times. I do see it as that first step to beginning to equalize the experience that kids have. And when you think about, even in Pennsylvania, what kids are learning from district to district and the kind of experience they have, it varies widely based upon zip code. And really, standards are a way to take us in the direction of at least having some kind of common expectation for what it is that students will be expected to learn and where we want to see them at different benchmarks along the way. I think about how education has changed in the time that I have been an educator from when I graduated from Cabrini, and I see efforts like Common Core and even No Child Left Behind as really changing education and making this a much more sophisticated experience for kids. Teaching and learning looks very, very different. So I'm a proponent of Common Core, and as with No Child Left Behind, a lot of folks see a lot of bad things about No Child Left Behind. I'm actually a believer that those things have helped public education and really have kicked it up a notch for us.
I think you're going to hear a lot of themes now that we're 3 people into talking about the standards positively. I would say I think there's 3 things for me that stick out from my experience and my background in curriculum and in teaching. One, and when the standards first hit, I turned to one of my colleagues when I was teaching AP, and I said, wow, the standards finally caught up to reading instruction, and to literacy instruction. And you can go all the way back to the 1930s and Louise Rosenblatt's work around reader response theory and transacting with text, and really look at what these sets of skills that the standards are pushing forward are really asking of our kids. And along the equitable side too, I ended my career teaching AP 11th grade language and composition. And I remember thinking, wow, and this kind of leads to the second point, this idea of the spiraling or the staircase of complexity. Somebody finally said that all kids deserve the level of rigor and the level of skilled teaching that was once really just the AP kids. They got that level of rhetoric and that level of analysis, and those were the kids that got that higher level. And the way these are built pre-K to 12 now, every year another layer goes in. So if the professional development's done and the other pieces are put into place, kids are going to get all kids will get the opportunity to have that basis built. And I think the third point, and I think looking at these standards and from a curricular angle, they're the farthest thing from creating common in terms of curriculum. I think with these moving from a content focus, especially in English language arts, moving from that traditional English literature feel for K-12 schools to more of a skills-based transfer, thinking in terms of understanding by design, really allows for more student choice. The idea of the balance of nonfiction opens up reading, an interest to kids that are going to major in business and science and mathematics, to expose them to high-quality books that are not just fiction. I was an English major at Boston College. I was about as English as English gets, in terms of literature. But having an experience with AP kids and with nonfiction with these kids that were going to the Harvards and the Yales and finally saying as juniors, wow, I'd love to read again. It was a really powerful experience. And I think when we start to look at this idea of skill-based transfer and the standards as the sort of the underlay for this, it really does allow for student choice, for a more student-centered build for our curriculums and for our schools.
Some of the things that I love about teaching is I love teaching assessment and I love teaching reading and language arts, as well as special education. And I was thinking about how all of these so well connect to the Common Core and how the Common Core is so good for all three of those things. When I look at the balanced literacy approach, and that was one of the controversies with the inception of the Common Core, teachers said, you know, they're doing away with the balanced literacy approach by using the Common Core. That's not true at all. What we found was that, as our panelists already mentioned, that we're looking at more literature, and we're looking at informational text that students will need later in life. One of the things that I taught when I taught high school was informational text, and I found that many times at the high school level, my students had great difficulty with informational text and how to unpack that and how to read that well. And I think that one of the things the Common Core does is it connects those pieces for them. And then when you look at assessment, one of the things that many of my students hear me say is assessment drives instruction. But with these standards, it helps you to look at it as cyclical. And I just talked about this today in my class, that you have your standards, you have your instruction, you have assessment, and you're constantly looking at all of those to see what you're doing as a teacher and what your students are learning. So I think with the Common Core, it helps to bring all of those pieces together and helps students to look at ways that they can unpack informational text, the reading and language arts, and connect those with the assessment.
As a teacher's point of view, my district has recently, tried to get curriculum that matches the new Common Core standards. We're using reading wonders right now in everyday math, and the Common Core standards are embedded in every lesson. I've noticed that my students, are facing more challenges than ever before, but at the same time, they're expected to do way more than they ever did before. So it's a good thing. And also, I appreciate having consistent guidelines among my peers, knowing that the teacher next door to me is doing the same things that I'm doing. And we're not repeating things, grade level to grade level. We also do poetry before with reading workshop. And second grade would do the same thing as third grade, and third grade would do the same thing as fourth grade. But now with these curriculums and these guidelines, we're doing what we're supposed to and what they're supposed to know.
So thanks everyone. Now, you've heard all the great stuff about the Common Core. And I know we're going to get some other questions. If it's any indication of the class, I just came out of guest lecture. So, but before we do that, I do want to ask the panelists, not necessarily all of you, but a couple of you to identify what do you see as the most significant challenge in implementing it. If it's not implementing the standards, if it's not just about the standards, but there are many other components, what's it going to take at the building level, at the district level, in the classroom level, and at the preparation level to make sure that more students are college and work ready? Who wants to take that one first? I used to be a principal, so I can pick someone.
I think that one of the things that we're hearing a lot about Common Core is the level of rigor. It has been a game changer, and I think really helping our teachers to try to figure out how do we take our students from where they are right now to get them to where they need to be. That to me, right now in the school setting, that has been the biggest challenge, because there is a dramatic difference between what we have been expecting of our students and where the bar is now. And really trying to figure out how to change practice, what materials we just have to let go of, and sometimes teachers are very difficult ones to let go of something that they've been doing for a long time. That to me has been a little bit of the challenge that I've been seeing in the school setting.
Good. Someone else?
So I think along those same lines, just a break from tradition, and change. I think many of us the manner in which we were taught is different than what's expected today. I think even teacher prep programs, you brought that up, and mentioned balanced literacy and the reading workshops and writing workshops at all levels up through the high school. There's a real need for that now, but when you're dealing with, especially at the secondary level, content specialists in literature or in mathematics or in science, because that's how we were trained, to then have someone come in and say, well, the content doesn't matter as much, but it still does, but really let's look at skills, because then you can get better with the content if you know the skills. And we're going, what? So I think that's a challenge. Because you have a group of teachers and a group of educators, and I was one of them, who for so long, that was our expertise, and that's changing, and technology's changing it, the standards are changing it, and today's societal demands are changing. I think that's a huge obstacle, because there's a fear there, and there's an uncomfortableness there.
I have to, when you talked about the societal needs, I thought about that too. And we all learned about hierarchy of needs, and we tend to forget where our children are coming from. And I think regardless if it's Common Core or not, we still have a struggle with where our students are coming from and making sure that we're getting them to where they need to be. And I think that that's an ongoing struggle regardless of the Common Core. We've heard about the poverty piece and how that plays in. And I think that would be an issue regardless. So I think it's, again, meeting our students where they are, and then, again, getting them where they need to be.
Then I want to raise your hand if you have a question. So the one comment I would make is, and especially for those students who are going to a teacher prep program right now, if you're going to teach in Pennsylvania or another state, our position is there needs to be a period of transition for accountability. If the state has risen to the challenge to raise the standards, we should not be dinging teachers and school districts for the performance of students who we know on these new assessments is going to drop. We've seen places like Kentucky who have handled it very well, have worked very well with teachers. Thousands of teachers have come together to develop voluntary curriculum. They are developing a transition to a new accountability system. Now, I say that, and in the same breath, I'm going to say we have a bit of a problem right now with the Secretary of Education at the federal level granting waivers subjectively to states. And so we have Washington State doesn't get a waiver on the accountability provisions. Oklahoma, who just so happened to pull out of the Common Core recently, doesn't get a waiver. But Michigan does get a waiver. So we need a long-term fix. We need a reauthorization of the Elementary Secondary Education Act, because that's where accountability is embedded, as opposed to these, you're going to get one and you're not going to get one. But we need to think carefully about the transition to a new accountability system. Otherwise, if we think we have challenges now in implementing the standards, we're going to have even greater challenges.
I really think that's where some of the pushback comes from with the accountability and getting all of our teachers on board and seeing this as a real positive thing. I mean, we are preparing to hold on tight right now because we know that the assessments that the kids are going to take this year are going to be radically different from anything that they have ever seen before. And we see where our performance is now. We're pleased, but we're bracing for what is going to be a change, and probably, I hate to even say it, a drop in their performance. And right now there is so much with that accountability piece, so much rides on it, that I think it is one of the things that influences the perception that not only our teachers have, but also our parents have. The parents our parents are not real fans of the system of assessment that is in place in Pennsylvania. I mean, I hear a lot from parents that they sort of trace a lot of things back to things that we're doing in schools and saying that's because of the PSSA, it's because of standardized testing, and we don't like it.
Questions from the audience?
I have a microphone, so just raise your hand.
Where does this Common Core standard start? Does it start in elementary, or are we talking high school?
Pre-K.
Yeah, you probably answered that.
No, that's okay. So
A lot of
if you take a look, and so you guys know, because we're in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania had the old academic standards around since I would say, what was it, like the early 2000s? Maybe a little bit around there. And they were more benchmark standards. They weren't year to year. And anybody that went through curriculum revisions back then remembers probably meetings where there was grade partners or arm wrestling over who gets what standard and what. It was a mess. These are pre-K-12. You can find a skill. It starts in pre-kindergarten, and it carries the same number all the way up through 12th grade. And then, as we mentioned earlier, there's the idea of the staircase of complexity. So what Pennsylvania did was they took the Common Core, they took the academic standards, and it's a hybrid. But it's the same. I mean, when you really look at the language of them, it's the same thing.
Yeah, now the difference, the answer is a little different on the assessment front. So all of the standards of the K-12 system, the assessment doesn't begin until grade 3. There's a lot of debate in this country about assessing young children in pre-K. Although we think there's an opportunity for better diagnostic assessments for 4 and 5-year-olds, as well as kindergarten through 2, which is all under the category, the umbrella of early childhood. So there is some discussion about whether or not states want to come together and collaborate to develop an early childhood assessment. But the testing with accountability does not come into play until 3rd grade. Over there, over on the end, in the back.
I'll just start with Alumni.
Teacher voice.
Hi. My question is about, you've mentioned the quantity of testing that goes on right now and how hopefully the Common Core standards might lessen that. I'm kind of curious, what would lessen the quantity of testing right now? Like, who would bow out of that system that exists?
So there are a couple of states where the State Commissioner of Education has put parameters around what the districts can spend their Title I dollars as it relates to assessment. And some of those states are saying to school superintendents, district superintendents, and principals, thou shalt not layer on, you cannot spend some of your state or federal dollars on additional assessments beyond what we're requiring from the state level, which is required by the federal government. Kentucky, again, if you're really interested in this topic, look at what Kentucky is doing. They have really gone district by district. Every district submits a budget to the state and what they're going to spend their dollars on. And they have found the coy attempts by districts to embed money for additional assessments and disallow them. So that's one example from a state. But I think parents are tired of the number of days that we reduce instruction because we're testing. Whether it's for diagnostic purposes or accountability purposes, we need to figure out not just the streamlining, which I hope doesn't take over the conversation. We need better information about how children are performing. And how do we present that information to parents so that they can also be a part of the learning process? You had your limit in the previous class. Okay, so now this is as student, not teacher. Okay, go ahead.
Now I'll ask you to respond. How would you respond to the statements that I hear often that teachers and central office and people in education make about the Common Core standards just being another wave and the possibility that if we wait long enough they will disappear? And that they are just another initiative, a flash in the pan, if you will. How do you respond to that?
So before I answer that question, any analysts want to take this on? I'm happy to answer it, but yeah, I don't have a coin, so I'm gonna go ahead, Anthony.
All right. I've been working with the standards for almost 3 years now, pretty intensely as a teacher and as a literacy coach and now as a curriculum supervisor. What we found in working with them is that this is good for kids. And with a lot of the different initiatives that at least I've seen, and I've only been in this game for about 15 years, this one's making a difference, at least in my experience with the teachers I've worked with in the prior school district. we saw real growth in our kids, we saw real engagement in our kids. And I think it's one of those instances where you can look at this and go, wow, this is good, why would we want to see this go away?
To piggyback off that, I think that, again, the standards really frame everything that you're teaching and everything you're doing in the classroom. So I think that it's giving you a roadmap, if you will, as to where you're going to go with your instruction, and it's keeping things level in terms of across grades, within schools, and then across schools, within districts. And I think it's just a great way to make sure that we're all on the same page. So I don't know if it's going to go away.
I can recall sitting around a table in 2001 saying the same of No Child Left Behind. And the culture of accountability and assessment that No Child Left Behind introduced, and I don't see that going anywhere. And here we are a number of years later. I guess I do want to just sort of comment about the assessment piece that you brought up. And I'm not so sure that the assessment that we do is really a bad thing. And I kind of echo what Colleen said before. As teachers, you can't separate the assessment piece from the instruction. And what I see, as I reflect back on my days as a math teacher, when I first graduated from Cabrini and started teaching, assessment was just this thing that we did at the end. The kids took the test. We really didn't look at the results. And now, we are much more sophisticated. We are looking at assessment data and saying, this is what this particular child needs, and it informs our instruction. So, I think what you may have been referring to may have been the high stakes assessment. That's where I think we need to figure out where is a good medium with the high stakes assessment. Right now, it does drive so much of what we do, and quite honestly, a lot of people in our schools live in fear of that high stakes assessment. Teachers for the first time this year in Pennsylvania are going to get a score on how their specific students did last year. And I gotta tell you, it's scary. It's scary. It's a different culture that we're in. But I don't know that I agree with people that say that we're doing too much assessing. I look at it as part and parcel to the instruction that we're doing. We're more sophisticated, we're more purposeful in our instruction.
So I'm going to actually repeat part of the answer I gave earlier, but let me start with a real life example. Indiana. We had a conservative governor, a Republican governor, Mitch Daniels, who's now president of Purdue University, support the standards. Indiana stuck with the standards. In comes a new governor, more conservative than Mitch Daniels. He starts a process, town hall meetings, but really mostly executive action, where they're going to repeal the adoption of the state standards in the state. It really became a political exercise. And the political exercise was, we just want to brand them the Hoosier standards. At the end of the day, Indiana retained, word for word, 98% of the Common Core. What I worry about, despite the commitment of the two organizations who led this effort, the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers, is that in November, we're going to have a new Republican governor in the state of Arizona. The outgoing governor, a Republican, couldn't be any more supportive of the standards. Some of the best work, in addition to Kentucky, in Arizona. But 6 of the 7 candidates who are running the primary don't just dislike the standards, they abhor the standards. So this is going to be state by state, but where we as an organization, the Business Roundtable, is going to play a role is we're going to make not just the bottom line case, the economic case. Because many of our employers, we have employees, our members have employees in every state. And they're only going to stay in those states if the state remains committed to the standards. Last thing I'll say is we had a state down south where the Speaker of the House was leading an effort to introduce his own bills, multiple bills, to repeal the state standards. And we had 2 CEOs come forward publicly and say, if you're not going to stay with the standards and you're going to keep changing your mind about what's important for children to learn, I think we could do business somewhere else. we'll just relocate. Because you can't have teachers and principals and parents on this track of, oh, today it's this set of standards, and 2 years later, it's another set of standards. So that's the way we're trying to impact this, but the elections are a huge challenge for us.
Thank you.
I'm nervous about the smile, but go ahead.
Oh, I do that a lot.
Okay.
I missed the first 10 minutes, so I apologize. This might have already been answered. I think the question I want to ask has not so much to do about the what or the standards or the how, but it's taking a step back and asking why. When I hear a lot of the reasons about why the standards are important and why increasing rigor is important, I don't necessarily disagree with the rigor as such. But the two primary throngs seem to be the development of preparation for work and preparation for college. And I can tell you in higher ed, more and more, college means preparation for work. You know, how are students going to transfer the skills they learn in college to the job? So fundamentally what I hear is, the purpose of all of this is to prepare people for work now, or prepare people for work later through college. And I guess I'm reminded by Neil Postman, who once observed that schools don't so much serve the public as much as they create the public. And I guess my question is, although I hear a lot about this economic necessity of this, how is it that these core standards help create a public? How do they create a citizenry? How do they create more than just the development of human capital for the private economic sphere? Thank you.
Anyone want to take that on?
Sure.
The mic is all yours.
Okay. So there's a fascinating interview with Louise Rosenblatt from 1999 University of Miami. She talks about her experiences growing up at Barnard College in Columbia in the 1920s. She was roommates with Margaret Mead. And she went to do her doctoral work over in Europe at the time, and during the rise of Nazi Germany in between world wars. And she talked about what led her to a lesson. She finished her degree in comparative literature, but really her groundbreaking piece in 1938 was on just literacy in general and the general reader. And a lot of that came out of her experience there, and was astounded at the amount of illiteracy that was prevalent in Europe at the time, and that, you know, there was this propaganda. People were just, oh yeah, this must be true, and there was no questioning. There was no real understanding of what was being asked. And looking at, again, going from the AP realm, where that's what we taught kids. You know, that's what the AP curriculum teaches. It's critical thinking, it's question the author, it's who's their audience. And looking at the standards now, I think to your question of what type of citizenry are we creating, you know, I think it's trying to create a citizenry that doesn't just agree. You know what I mean? Because someone on TV says so. I think and when you look at the build of the standards and you look at the level of depth of thinking that we're asking for kids, I really, and you know, when you look at I also taught like the lowest level inclusion courses, you know, classes with kids, all low socioeconomic kids in the district I was in, and you know, a lot of the unfortunate side to that is, oh, we can't get, we just gotta stick with comprehension. You know, literal meaning, these kids can't do anything more than that. And you know, what we're finding is, yes, they can. You know, and there's got to be a change in our understanding of what those kids can do and how we can contextualize that and help them. And I think that these standards are a step in that direction, because we are now saying, as I said earlier, all kids need this skill. All kids need to be able to read, whether it's a political piece or whatever it is, and question it, and question themselves and say, wait, there's bias here. You know, and that's where I think when you talk about what type of system, I mean, what makes a democracy? It's an informed citizenry. You know what I mean? And not an Orwellian future, you know? And I think that that the build of these is helping to do that.
You know, when we first brought, a good friend of mine, Gene Wilhoit, and I brought together the governor's offices and the state superintendent's school, and we met in Chicago to propose this idea to develop standards. And we knew at the outset that everyone was going to follow Massachusetts' lead. One, the commissioner there has a great reputation, very well respected by many in the country. And two, Massachusetts performs better than anyone on international assessments. They have some of the best standards in the country. They have high college going and completion rates. They have high employment rates after college. I mean, they had the best package out there. And everyone in the room wondered, why do this? What's the reason? We hear the economic arguments. And Mitch Chester, the commissioner in Massachusetts, stood up and said, as high as our standards are in Massachusetts, we can do better. Not only can we do better, but we have a moral imperative to be better, to the points that Anthony raised. So that, just as much as the arguments that I threw up on the slides, that more than anything is what drove the chiefs, the state superintendents, and the governor's offices to do this. That the changing demographics in this country demand that we try to lift all boats. This is one way. Again, not the silver bullet, but it's one critical step to getting there.
Hi. I have a lot of degrees and I just love education. I'm retired, but I'm not retired. So I have a question. I'm proponent for special ed. My grandmother was a special ed teacher. She was one of the first in the 50s. And I think I was born to be a special ed teacher. And my thing is with these standards, what happens to our kids? And are they still given the revisions, assessments, these diagnostic assessments? I mean, is that still around? Because I'm retired and I don't know, but I went out of retirement and I was teaching in a private place and the director refused to even order them for my kids. And I was a reading specialist for them. And it just really upset me. So hopefully with all this new diagnostic testing and teachers getting the grades of the test, that they take into consideration the clientele that they teach and also of where they teach. Because I was in an urban setting as a special ed teacher and it was 90% poverty. And I can see it. I can see the scores coming back, merit money coming, and my colleagues losing their jobs probably. So I hope they take that all into consideration. Don't forget our special ed students.
Important comment.
I totally hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. And what I hope is that they're looking for progress. We know that all students can make progress. Even those our special education students that we love, they do make progress. We do that when we progress monitor them all the time. We're doing that when we're doing our task analysis, and we're looking at the progress they make with the task analysis. So I hear you, and I hope that that is the case, and that they're looking to see that they're making gains.
Go ahead, Bob.
And that is the focus. I mean, the focus is on growth. I would still say with our special education students and our special education teachers, it is still, there is still a challenge. It's not easy. But the assessment for teachers is really predicated upon a year's worth of growth in a year's time. Our kids at a different spot as a result of having been with that teacher and benefited from the instruction over the course of the school year.
I went back into subbing with Source for Teachers because I can't stay away from the kids. So I was in a classroom this week and this regular ed teacher had 10 special ed students and 6 regular ed students. And I asked her, how's that going? she just, that's really hard. That's really hard. And so is that part of the pendulum going the other way again? I mean, is it going to Is it going to swing back? You know, everybody knows that education goes back and forth with the pendulum since the 50s. So I'm just curious, how long is that going to be with the children, you know, co-teaching? And I was the special ed teacher, and I had to climb stairs like 8 times in one day. This poor special ed teachers don't even have a classroom anymore. I was exhausted by the end of, well, I'm old too, but I was exhausted by the end of the day. And I said, God love you, thank God I'm retired.
I think I have time for one more question.
Great.
Anyone?
And Jessica, I'm going to give you the last word.
Oh, great.
Educators on prepping you.
All right.
From your perspective. Where we go from here? Yes.
My question is about assessments. Now, we know that teachers, we talked about the cyclical model of instruction and the assessment guides, the instruction keeps going round and round. How do we know that the teachers are using the data from their assessments and actually using it to guide their instruction? Because I have found in my own community that's really not happening. So who is guiding that? Is it the superintendent of schools, or is it the state, or is it just the district level? Can you answer that?
Well, I can tell you that if those teachers are coming to Cabrini, I'm teaching them to do that.
Okay, well, that's nice.
I think, I mean, I can't speak for Anthony, but that's where I spend a lot of my time. It's one of the things that I find that teachers that maybe did not have Dr. Lilly, it's not something that they know how to do.
Right.
And it's not something that was part of my teacher preparation program. We're in a different age right now. So I think a lot of times I hear from teachers, I don't know what to do with this data. We are setting up structures in our school, and it's something that as the leader, it's my responsibility to ensure that if we're going to take the time to assess, that we absolutely take the time to do something with what we know and learn from the assessment. Otherwise, it is just a colossal waste of time and resources.
And I think just to, real quick, Dane earlier mentioned the professional development around these. I think
Exactly.
That's a perfect example of an area with a lot of this that has to happen.
And I would like to
it's
see that
whether it's the
enforced.
principal or the superintendent, or in our case, it's become our district. We're trying to create that culture across the whole district. 12th grade on down, because I can tell you as a secondary guy, that was not the norm. Whereas I know in the K-5 realm, diagnostics and benchmarks is more of a running records. That's always been more part of that culture. So it's got to be a district thing, I think, or at least a building thing. Whatever leadership is, and starting to build that framework for the teachers.
Well, would you ever expect, Mr. Linn, that if they, that it would ever come down to, it would have to be part of the Common Core, where that data analysis had to be part of almost a standard, not within the students, but within.
In Pennsylvania, part of the evaluation, I know we didn't really do an evaluation, but 20% to 35% of the teacher's evaluation is based on what's called a student learning objective, which is a teacher-created assessment in which they have to collect data, like almost like, back in college, the action research type of idea.
Right, yes.
Where you're collecting data, you're analyzing data, and you're adjusting based off that. So it is creeping its way into, creeping is a bad word, but it's making its way into more of the formal, the connotation away from that, but, the formal side of evaluation.
And so that's the reason for the SLOs then, is for.
I think it's part of it, yeah. I think with the SLOs too, it gives the teacher the ability to really showcase his or her strengths and talents, and to really get to know those kids in the manner that they can through the use of data and through the planning with the assessments there.
Thank you so much.
And just one more thing there with that. I think that if we've not been seeing and feeling like teachers are using the data, I think that we're poised for a revolution in Pennsylvania, because I know that in about 3 weeks, when that teacher-specific data is released, you you're not going to be able to help but say, okay, this is now what I know about my kids. This is what I know about my teaching. It's personal now. This is not just how the school did or how all of our kids did. This is how my kids did. And I think that more than ever, we're poised to see teachers ready to say, okay, what do I need to do? What does this tell me about my teaching and about my practice? So I think that we're at a point where we're going to see some changes.
Well, thank you, everyone. But before we leave, we're going to give Jessica the last word because she's on the front line.
It's funny because I've been listening to everything, and when we were talking about challenges, one of them was special ed, I was going to bring up. The other one was the pressure on us teachers with this teacher evaluation system. And the one thing we didn't say, but kind of relates to what you said, is time. I think often administrators forget that with all this data collection, us teachers only have a certain amount of time to get this done in a day. So as far as prepping our lessons and dealing with the day-to-day things that we do as nurturers, and dealing with a sick child or a homeless child or a child getting abused at home, we have so much going on, and special ed too. Data collection on behavior, all different things. They forget about the time part, and we need more time, I think, as teachers to look at our assessments. So I don't know if that'll ever be a day becomes longer, or if we get paid a little more. I don't know. But that piece, that time piece, I think we need to look into with this Common Core, if we want to do it right for teachers.
Topic number 3 for the next
Educators on campus event.
There you go.
Please join me in thanking Dane and the panelists. What we're hoping is that we'll continue conversation with refreshments. So before that, we want to do door prizes. But we know that a few people came in from class late, so please raise your hand if you did not get a ticket, and Jackie's going to go around and make sure that you get a ticket. Maybe we should get some help, yes. So everybody else, just pull out your tickets. The other thing that I wanted to let you know is when we're done with the door prizes, there are refreshments. We thought that that would be also a good time to dialogue and network and connect. And then the other thing is before you leave, over at the table, we also have a bag for each of you, which is a Cabrini bag that also has a Cabrini pennant in it. There's the admissions. Shannon, what else is in there from admissions?
The alumni referral card.
The alumni. Do you want to tell them a little while they're doing it? We have a few minutes.
So the alumni referral card is in your bag, so if you know of a prospective high school student, we encourage you to please fill that card out, and they will get a $500 scholarship each year that they are here at Cabrini, thanks to you. So fill it out.
So that referral card is really important for those of you that are teaching, going in the classroom. There's literature there for our undergraduate admissions. There's also literature for our graduate admissions. As you may know, we have a number of additional certifications if you want to add those on as well. What I'm going to do is going to mix these up, and I'm going to have each one of the panelists and Dane pick one out, because we have 5 door prizes. Wait a minute.
Don't pull your own.
So what you're going to do is you can start take one and pass it along. And then we're going to be the number. And up here are the 5 door prizes. So once the first person gets to come and pick the 5, and then unfortunately the 5th one will get what's last, which is just as good as what was there first. Okay, so first number.
Drum roll. 546056.
Our graduate from last year. I have to say something about Amanda. When you were talking about running all over the building and being tired of special ed, Amanda's like, I do the exact same thing. First year as a learning support specialist, our graduate from last year. Okay, the next number.
Next number is 546021.
And where are you from? Are you in one of the classes?
No, I'm actually one of the generals from the local street.
Oh, and then next number?
Next number is 546034.
Yay!
There you go.
And tell us your name.
Peggy Renninger.
Thank you, Peggy. Thanks for joining us tonight and for sharing as well.
Certification in elementary special ed, reading specialist, and my master's here.
Wonderful. No Cabrini, right? Okay. All right, and then next number?
546057.
Yes. Are you also working with the library? We're gonna have such a great story for the library. We want to be front page.
Page 2, that way it's a positive one.
This was next. What's that? Above the fold, exactly.
Last but not least, 546022.
Thank you. 5460. And are you from one of our classes too?
No.
Oh, yay! A lot of our love are coming. Okay, we just want to thank you all for coming out, and I think what we experienced tonight is this opportunity as educators coming to campus and being able to share their views and talk about what's going on, not only in our classrooms, but in our lives, and how that really affects, you know, the world in general, and the way we prepare our students for the world. So thank you for joining us with this part. We ask that you go to the back and get a refreshment, and then there's some fruit and some cheese and crackers over there. So please join us, you know, for some more dialogue and discussion. And thank you for coming tonight.